so we're coming up.
Sorry.
No problem.
You're fine.
Okay, I wasn't sure. So we're coming up on our 50th anniversary of its founding. Still on. So, as I said, I want to talk today about what our forefathers and our foremothers, if you don't mind that phrase, did to keep Dublin, or make Dublin what it is, and to establish a standard that kept volunteerism and collaboration as a part of this community, and how it grew and why it grew so well. You know, we continue, in the City of Dublin staff and all the people here, we continue to emphasize the teamwork, the volunteerism. I want to take you back 60 years. I want you to imagine Dublin. Why 60 years? Well, 60 years ago, you know, I'm sorry.
You Wolf? Yeah. It's not advancing.
Sorry, we have technical difficulties.
Not advancing. Okay. Go ahead.
I will.
There you go. There we go.
So, to give you a perspective, 60 years ago, 1963, Dublin, the population of the people of Dublin within the city limits is now 100 times as much as it was in 1963. There were a little over 500 people within the village limits at that point, and now there's 50,000. And yeah, look around. We've grown pretty well. To give you a perspective, the boundaries of Dublin stretched all the way in 1963, stretched from where Indian Run crosses North High Street down to Grandview Drive, just south of the curve there. On the east side, the boundary was just beyond, on the east side of the river. The area where Bridge Park was actually a part of the village of Dublin, but it was all farm fields. Soon to be a golf course. But then on the west side, it was just Monterey Drive, just west of the cemetery. So that was a pretty small area, 500 people. The entire Washington Township school district, which included many people in Perry Township on the east side of the river, was, you know, all housed. The whole school was housed in the 1919 building and what is now Sells Middle School. It was the high school the Dublin High School back in the day. There were, to give you an idea, there were 62 students that started first grade in 1958. To give you a perspective, that was my first grade class. And we were the biggest class by far. There were 3 whole school buses for the entire City of Dublin school route. And the school district stretched from the southeast corner at Reed and Henderson out to Avery Road, north up here to Glick Road. Now, Jerome area was also in the school district. It went all the way out to Brock Road and over to Industrial Parkway. It's a huge school district. Imagine being on a school bus to cover half of that at any one time. It was a long day if you were the first one on, or the first one on. Route 61, including the bridge across the Scioto, was 2-lane road. You could literally stop in the middle of 161 and talk to somebody for 3 or 4 minutes and not have to move for a car. Picture that today. Yeah. Sawmill Road, which was the eastern part of our school district for the most part, was lined on both sides by cornfields. All the way up, all the way back. Bethel Road was the same way. It was just a wonderfully small community. Interstate 270 did not exist. Like I said, there were no golf courses in the city of Dublin at that moment. There were soon to be 3, but none of them that exist today. There was one traffic light at Bridge and High. There was one church in town, the Dublin Community Church. There were two grocery markets in town. The only restaurant in town was across the river, right at the southeast corner of a roundabout, if you can call it a corner when a roundabout. But it was the Dublin nightclub, which had been established in 1930 and existed until 1966 when it burnt down. There were no computers, no internet, no Starbucks, no fast food. It was a community where everybody knew everybody. You know, with 500 people in the village limits, but most of Washington Township considered themselves a part of Dublin. Yeah, my classmates, when we finished high school, we'd been going to school together for 12 years. There were 120 of us that graduated in 1970. So it was like graduating with cousins. You know, we saw each other 5 days a week, plus at church on Sunday. You know, it was that type of thing that we just knew each other that well. Our parents knew each other. Our parents knew who we were. We knew who their dogs were. I mean, it was just, yeah, it was that kind of a town. Couldn't get into much trouble without everybody knowing about it at that point.
Tell us that story.
No, I'll tell you, my granddad was a judge on the juvenile court. And he would sit there and he'd point his finger at me and says, if you ever get in trouble and get before me, I'll make an example of you. And scare the living bejesus out of me. There's a natural beauty to the city of Dublin. The river, the creek beds, the forest, the woodlands. You know, it was really, that natural beauty is how Dublin got its name, actually. Am I still on? Mm-hmm. Okay. John Sells, who landed in Dublin way back in the early 1800s, eventually hired a fellow by the name of John Shields to a surveyor to plat the ground around the village of Dublin. And, you know, John was so impressed with John Sells was so impressed with John Shields that he said to John Shields, I want to give you the honor of naming this town. And John Shields didn't hesitate. He says, it reminds me so much of my hometown of Dublin, Ireland. I think we ought to call it Dublin. And I think it was a pretty good choice. You know, we've got Hayden Run, Indian Run, the falls there, the woodlands, like I said, it's just a beautiful place to live. You know, Dublin was largely an agricultural community for a long, long time. And neighbors made a point of working together. You know, when a farmer got his crop ready, everybody would pitch in and help him get his crop in, and vice versa. They would go, that farmer would go help in another weekend or whatever day it is that they were bringing their crop in. So there was a spirit of collaboration and volunteerism as we went along during that period of time. You got to know your neighbors. They weren't physically close one to the other, but their farms weren't the big mega farms that you see today. They were just a couple hundred acres at best. As I mentioned earlier, one church, the Dublin Community Church, was built in 1877 as the Dublin Christian Church, and it was just the chapel. There wasn't any basement under it or anything like that. Built on solid limestone, to be honest. But by 1900, with a population of maybe 400, there were 3 churches in Dublin. One on South High Street, one on North High Street, and the one up on Bridge Street. And, you know, in 1912, a tornado came through, and it took out 2 of those 3 churches, and the only one left was the Dublin Christian Church. And as a result of that, you know, with the lack of population, the townspeople all got together and said, you know, why rebuild those other 2 churches? Let's just make it a community church. So all 3 of those churches joined, and it created yet more collaboration and more contact one with your other neighbors on a more frequent basis. that merger led to, well, meetings of community members. In the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s even, there was no rec center. There was no, no place to meet. So the church was the natural place to meet for anything other than church as well. So Boy Scouts met there, the Women's Club met there. Actually, the Boy Scouts still meet there. They were established in 1945. Like I said, there was one school, and to give you perspective, in the 1940s, the average size of the class was maybe 10 to 15 students. My mother graduated in a class of 7 students in 1944. She always bragged about finishing in the top 10 of her class. And my dad graduated the year following. He had a whopping 16 students. They were always so very close one to the other. I mean, when you got that few of people, I guess, in the school, and that at that time it was all in the 1919 building. That was before John Sells Middle School was built. You knew everybody from 1st grade to 12th grade. It was a very tight-knit community. But in the late 40s, early 50s, the Ohio Education Department came to Washington Township and said, you don't have the people to continue this school. And it's a concern, you're just not generating enough tax revenue to continue your existence. We're going to suggest that we take everybody that's in Washington Township and send them down to the Hilliard schools, and everybody in Perry Township east of the river, and send them to the Worthington schools. Well, that was the first time Dublin really raised the citizens of Dublin really raised their iron and said, no, we're going to figure out something else. And so they went to Jerome. They went out to New California, which both had little schools. And they said, why don't we merge our school districts together? And as a result of that, I think that had a large part in keeping Dublin together, because had you split those schools up, there wouldn't have been the core of something there. It was a critical moment in Dublin's history, in my judgment. We were thinking, I'm thinking in terms we could have ended up in something like Linworth, from that standpoint. So, on to 19 there. So the village, the church, the school system all work together to make Dublin a good place to live. Most of the school board, village council members, were also at church every Sunday. I've emphasized that more than once. There was, give you the idea of the collaboration. In the 1940s, the church suffered a fire in the sanctuary. Where were we going to meet? Well, the school said, come on over, meet at church, meet at the school building for a while. And happily they did that, because about 15 years later, they were building Indian Run Elementary, because my class was the bubble, the rat and the snake, I guess is the best way to say it. We were the one that was triggering the need to expand the system. And so they were building Indian Run Elementary that was supposed to be ready in the fall of 1960. Well, it wasn't ready, and there was no room for the 3rd grade classes. So the school said, hey, Dublin Community Church, could we use your Sunday school rooms to have the 3rd grade host over there until the school was built? So we spent about 5 months going to school at the Dublin Community Church. Now, in today's environment, that might raise a little bit of a stink, but it was no big deal. People knew it had to get done, and it was just the working together aspect of it that really made that a good thing to have happen. And even today, the church works with the city, providing much needed parking for the south side of Bridge Street for some of the businesses down there, so they don't have to go out and move their car every 2 hours to not get a ticket. Not judging, I'm just saying. Yeah, and the spirit continued on in 1972 was when what is now Dublin Kaufman High School was ready to open in the fall of 1972. They had a brand new football field. Well, all of a sudden, said, well, we've got to build some bleachers for the football field here. And I remember being a part of that team that went out there, and there were probably 100 of us that helped put the bleachers together for that fall over a weekend. And it was a huge project because those bleachers still stand as the visitor side at Dublin Kaufman. They moved them when the football field moved because the football field at that time was behind Willow Grove, right along 270. Going to talk a little bit about that other service organization in Dublin called Kiwanis. Kiwanis was founded the Kiwanis Club of Dublin was founded in 1961. Once again, it was a place for, it was a way to gather together. It was building a team, if you will, of city fathers that wanted to make sure Dublin kept going and did well. Initially, they met at the Dublin nightclub, but then when it burned down, they had to find someplace else to go. We had a few, it was always a business meeting, very much like this meeting that you have here. It was a good place for everybody to sit and talk and make some decisions that were good for Dublin. We had a couple notable things that we did. We had something called the frog jumping contest, which started actually in 1967, and we had held it for 50 years. Awarded a lot of scholarship money over the years. And it should be noted that the members of the club went out and caught the frogs, and made sure they were held. It was the week before the frog jump, and boy, there were some blurry-eyed volunteers the day of the frog jump. But we also made a point of returning those frogs to the ponds because it would have been really bad press if we had a frog leg fry after the frog jump. But again, it was an opportunity for the Kiwanis Club to collaborate and work together and make some decisions because there were some big decisions coming down the road in the mid 60s. But pardon me, I got to find myself here. 1965-ish, we were looking at 270 was on the drawing board. And the initial call was for the 270 to turn east about where Hayden Run is now. But some of the city fathers and the members of the Kiwanis Club and the members of the church, all got together and said, we really need to encourage them to put it all the way up to Dublin. And they were successful in getting that done because as a result of that, Ashland Chemical was willing to come up to Dublin, establish its corporate headquarters there. They did a lot to keep Dublin growing. And some guy named Nicholas did something with some land up here. I don't remember exactly. No, that had a big impact. So we knew it was coming. Jack actually bought this land in the 60s and started working toward getting Muirfield Village done. So the combination of Ashland Chemical coming to Dublin, 270 being finished, Muirfield Village on the plates, the Dublin fathers, and mothers did a lot to make sure that, Dublin grew right. Their zoning was put into place. Planning was put into place, just a lot of different good things that made sure that Dublin grew right. I can't say enough about that collaboration that started to happen. I'm trying to check where my time is here.
You only have 2 minutes to take questions.
Okay, all right. That's why I was trying to get it wrapped up here. Volunteer programs that are here in Dublin today are a large part of that growth through all those things. And I don't have time to talk about all the committees and the guys that John Reiners and Ron Gieses who did a lot for this city. Dublin's grown very well. My parents, I feel very, very confident that, it was no accident that the generation got here. They did a lot to make sure it did right. And I think as they would look back on it now, they'd be very proud of where this community has grown. They didn't do it for financial gain. They did it for their neighbors, and making sure that it was a good place to live. So that's fundamentally what I wanted to talk about today. Worried about getting done. Go ahead.
One of the things that we wanted to make sure and leave some time for was questions and answers before we hit the 8:30 mark. Could you start us off at just telling us a little bit, how did some of the corporate headquarters like Wendy's and some of the other ones, are there any stories that you want to share around some of how that happened? And then we want to make sure you get some questions from everybody.
Well, Dublin, as soon as, candidly, Jack Nicklaus had a lot to do with that. Dave Thomas of Wendy's was an avid golfer and was a part of Muirfield Village, and that was a little bit of why he wanted to come to Dublin. But fundamentally, it was the attraction of Dublin's potential for growth. It wasn't downtown. It was a nice community, a pretty community, and they knew they could form some of the structure, that is there today as well, that they would have a say in that structure.
Great. How about some other questions?
Tom, would you give us a little bit about Leadership Dublin and obviously your involvement as the founder and president, and you are the face of Leadership Dublin.
Sorry to say that. 26 years ago or so, the city council had this Chamber of Commerce had a strategic planning meeting, and they knew that they felt as a result of that meeting they wanted to create a called a feeder program for nonprofits and other volunteer organizations in the community. So that was the seed of Leadership Dublin. Margie Ambrose was the driving force behind that, and she pulled together a remarkable bunch of people. I had told her already that because I was in the training business at the time at Ross, what was then Ross Laboratories, and I said I'd seen an article in the paper about Upper Arlington had a leadership program. So I said, if Dublin ever does this, let me know. So I was in a room with 16 other people who were way above my pay grade at the time. There were 3 school principals, I think 4 ministers, 2 or 3 council members, and that was the start of it. I just happened to be the one who survived that meeting from the very beginning in 1996. But we kept it going since then, and I think the program has survived very well for the community.
Yeah, that's good. Can you say a word about what the objective was then or now for the?
Well, the objective I think is still maintained to be the program to create leaders for nonprofit, for organizations in the community. Our first success story, I think I always brag about, is Scott Metters, who ran for school board, and had been on school board for a long time. I think now he's running for trustee for the township. And so I every time I see Scott, I shake his hand and say thank you for your service, because he was the first graduate who ran for an elected position and won that elected position. But we have so many people who have taken positions with leadership positions in nonprofits or been on boards or on their homeowners associations to influence the community for the better. That was the primary purpose. Yes, sir.
Not to pile on, but part of the Leadership Dublin program is a project, and these ideas come from various sources within the community. And each class, whatever number there's usually about 3 to 4 projects, And you'll see that if you track those programs, quite a few have become bona fide community programs. The Field of Dreams was a study done by this group initially. We have something that's called the Dublin Corporate Challenge. That's a wonderful program. The service project in May.
And community service day.
Community service
Parts
day.
of these programs from these leadership classes. So these classes, in addition gaining leadership understanding, have also given quite a bit to the community.
Thank you, and thank you, Bill. And the tracking the stories behind the veterans who are interred at the Dublin Cemetery is the current one that's gone on. I think we're in the third year of finding those stories. I was just telling Clay this morning, I found another veteran in some records yesterday that I'll feed into that program. So we're still working on some of those projects and feeding information into the people who are continuing to work on these projects. So it's wonderful to see them.
Tell us about the Dublin Historic Society.
1974 was the year that they started, and the Dublin was very small at the time. They were a bunch of friends, a group of friends who said we need to do something to help collect the stories around the people who originally came here to Dublin and start writing this stuff down. And they did. Emmett Carr was one of the instigators behind that, or one of the founding members. There were so many, Catherine Loveland, who was involved in the schools and the library. Gosh, there's too many names to try to remember and give credit to. But the Kaufman House is our headquarters or our base. Ida Kaufman was living there. Kaufman House, Kaufman Park, Kaufman Road, and Ida was before she passed away at age 99 in 1983. She agreed with the city to give her house to the Dublin Historical Society as a museum. So that's why we keep that house in the condition it is, and we give tours to them. We're getting ready to on November 3rd to do a huge event for the third graders. And
John Wright, yeah.
John
Wright Elementary, yeah.
Daniel Wright Elementary to was through Katie Gould, who's a dynamic person, a teacher at Wright and Thomas Elementary Middle School. I get that wrong.
Elementary.
And they're going to do walking tours and tours there. So we're getting more and more involved in the schools. Thank goodness, thanks to Katie's work.
And November 4th.
And November 4th, History Day. That's at the library.
Last two questions, Rich and Susan.
I just wanted to think part of I know a big part of the historical site is archiving and documenting this picture. Is there a place where everybody can go to see this?
Yes, since 2011, we've been working to collect and document and archive on a database the Dublin's history, photographs and images, documents, and so on. Dublin Memories, if you just Google Dublin Memories, you'll find that it's under the Columbus Metropolitan Library's site. That's the home base for it. We have 800 or so images, photographs, documents, and so on, including someone mentioned the charter. I think this morning I had it in my head. You can see a lot of Dublin history at dublinmemories.org, and it is, and we're still adding to it. But we're collecting things constantly, including on November 4th, Saturday. We're going to be recording some histories with some of our senior members of the community, and with the help of the library. So it's still alive and ongoing. We've been working on this for a long time.
Tom, we've got 35 years of Rotary history we'd like to contribute as well.
Well,
We might have to work on that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Dynamic part of the community.
had a slide up there, the pedestrian bridge.
Yes.
And I was just curious, was that located where today's is, and what was the difference in budgets?
Well, budget was the biggest question. Yeah, the Kiwanis Club proposed the parkland and the walking bridge across the Dublin or the Scioto River back in the mid-1980s. Dublin didn't have the funding to even think about doing that at the time. But the Kiwanis Club started doing a little bit of the park work there, but it's fundamentally that bridge is in pretty much the same place. One of our members, Dan Smith, who was an architect, had kind of laid that out. We have a whole brochure that we had printed up at the time to present to Dublin. But again, Dublin wasn't even a city at that point. It was a village. We knew we were going to grow, but we wanted to open that parkland up on both sides to get the east and the west together in the center of Dublin.
Please join me and thank you very much. Our speaker, wonderful.
I have to say, your passion about collaboration and the teamwork it's taken to build our city is amazing. Wonderful to hear. And thank you again for being our speakers today. I will mention that next week we have a tremendous opportunity. Roland, Roberta, and Sharon will be sharing the Dominican Republic trip and everything that's been happening in that international. And I know Roberta is very excited about sharing those pictures and everything that you guys did for your patients and the communities in Dublin, Dominican Republic that you touched. So we look forward to that for our next week's program. I'm going to give us a quote here to close down. We make a living from what we get, but we make a life from what we give. Winston Churchill. Have a good read.
Oh.